Welcome to 28 Days Beyond, where we reflect and celebrate our history, our heritage, our culture in our own authentic voice. And I'm your host, Alexander Evans, with my co-host, Omari Johnson.
It's good to see you again.
We're back again, man. We deal with some difficult subjects. We're going to talk about the perception of black males in education.
All right.
What are some thoughts come to your mind?
I mean, my own experience, obviously, you know what I mean? Just sort of being a judge immediately what your capabilities are, right? What your behavioral patterns are going to be, and then kind of being, you know, siphoned off into whatever that expectation was. You know what I mean? What about you?
I was a comedian, so I was a funny guy.
Now, is that what you said, or is that what they told you?
I can sing in the shower, but okay. But I think with me, I don't know. I think people had certain perceptions.
Yeah.
See, I wore glasses, so I look smart. I was smart, but I look smart.
Yeah.
So people just had, and I used to wear my shirt and just button all the way out. So I think appearance and.
So you were square, is what you're telling us right now.
Yes. Well,
oh wow, you admitted to it. All right, cool.
Well, I think, and I think that's another valid point, that how we dress, right, can determine how people view and treat us. Just because I wore glasses, that don't mean I was smart. Right. And just because I buttoned my shirt all the way up to the top, that don't mean I wasn't cool.
But they perceived you as being smart based off of your glasses. How did that sort of alter their behavior towards you?
Well, it didn't. I mean, one, I was inquisitive, right? My problem was I talked too much. That was my problem.
No.
So I talked too much, and I told a lot of jokes in class, and I got a son that's just like that. So God bless the teachers.
Yeah, that's it,
so,
that's
it. but I think that was the thing. But sometimes I didn't want to be seen as a nerd to a degree, or didn't want people to just look at my appearance and just condense who I was from that perspective as well.
Yeah. What you mentioned your own son.
Yeah.
How has his experiences, has it been different from yours? Has it, you know what I'm saying, been in line with what you experienced?
Yeah, so my son is big and he's aggressive, but he's in a different culture. So he's in a.
But what does aggressive mean? I mean, because that's definitely a title that's often given to young black, you know, males who are simply either excited or just having a good time, or, you know what I mean?
Well, I think back, you're right. I was high energy, high active, hyperactive.
Yeah.
But we didn't get tagged with those labels. So, and my son was very assertive, and he's physical, and I'm that way. He's a touchy-feely kind of person. But in the culture he grew up in suburban America, that's perceived as onslaught, you know. So it's kind of funky, and we went through a couple transitions dealing with that as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you know, this is a topic that a lot of people talk about, perhaps not enough, or at least not in the right ways. What are some potential solutions to this issue as you see it?
People got to see themselves in the kids and see their kids in that person.
Well, that might be a problem when you've got a majority of white women teaching black children that they just can't see themselves in.
They didn't see their sons, though.
There it is. They can see. So luckily today, right, we're joined by an expert. So it's Dr. Ron Whitaker, who is an assistant professor at Cabrini University, to shed some light on the perception of males in education. So when we come back, we will be joined by Dr. Ron Whitaker.
I don't feel like people see Oakland or our people for who they really are. Everybody sees us as criminals and we're threats.
Put your arm in.
Raise your hand if there's any animosity towards the police in this room right now, and don't be afraid to do it. We expect it. How do you think the police view youth? Boom.
A threat, you know. I feel like they fear us in some ways. That's why in like videos we see when they just come out and the first thing they do is draw their weapons.
How many of you have a friend or a relative who's lost their life due to violence here in Oakland? How many? Oh my God.
Good?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm hanging. You better hurry up. You better get there to class before I do. Woo. I got your stuff. Come see me after school.
As a system, we're like, we have to look at, we're suspending far too many black boys. What do we need to do? What do we need to do differently? African-American males are located in an environment that doesn't have their best interests in mind, and you have to have very targeted strategies for those students that are furthest away from opportunity.
We're back with 28 Days and Beyond, and on the set with us, we have Dr. Ronald Whitaker.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You have a unique perspective when it comes to black males being viewed as princes, not problems. Can you break that down for us?
Well, first of all, let's just deal with the greater narrative that's going on with black boys.
Okay.
When we look at this so-called achievement gap, what they say is, okay, well, black boys are underperforming on test scores in relation to other subgroups vis-a-vis white males. Then we throw in expulsion rates. We throw in suspension rates. So oftentimes educators, they're looking at external remedies. Well, if we just give more time on task, if we just put more supports in the classroom. But I think what we need to really deal with is this conversation of race and racism and vicious stereotypes that unfortunately too many people don't want to have that dialogue. So when I talk about viewing black males as problems, I think of Malcolm X, and he talks about his 7th grade teacher. Young Malcolm, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a lawyer. Unfortunately, you're a nigger, you can't be a lawyer, right? So that's a problem perspective. We even hear the classic song by Biggie, Juicy, and he starts the song giving a shout out to the teachers who told him he would never amount to anything, okay? It's a problem perspective. Not too long ago, Tavis Smiley, he did a documentary called Too Important to Fail. And he chronicles this young man who talks about his 4th grade teacher, who basically told him that, I just wish you never come to school. That's a problem perspective. And that young man talked about from that time on, his whole love and his joy for education, it just left him. So, when we're viewing black males from a problem perspective, if they're going into schools and if they're going into classrooms in which they are viewed as a problem, if they are disrespected, devalued, and the black male body is viewed as disdain, obviously to me, when we look at these test scores, it's not surprising.
Wow.
So what would be the other side of that coin? You're saying not a problem, but
a prince.
Right.
When we talk about viewing black males from a prince perspective, we're talking about high expectations. We're talking about, some work that's being done at Urban Prep Academy, and they're talking about the success of the school, but what many people overlook is the fact that before those young boys go into the classroom each day, they're starting with an affirmation, what we believe. So it's this affirmation of what they can become. When we're talking about viewing black males from a prince perspective, it's talking about, let's look at their holistic brilliance. Let's not just stop at the test scores, but let's say, well, you know what, this person has great interpersonal skills. This person is a leader. Let's integrate that into the classroom. Let's integrate that into the curriculum. So essentially what I'm talking about is culturally responsive curriculum, culturally responsive programming. But then what I'm also talking about is training teachers and educational leaders. Because at the end of the day, if we're putting teachers and educational leaders in schools and in classrooms in which they still are viewing black boys from a deficit perspective, we're going to continue to have these problems.
That's heavy lifting.
He's dropping the mic.
He's dropping the mic. So what can a parent do in dealing with this? Their boys going to school. I'm a parent. All 3 of us are parents. What remedies would you give to a parent on how to handle that? Because sometimes, too often, we go and don't handle the situation right.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important, not just for the parents, but I'm going to answer that with the parents, but also for the community.
Okay.
It takes a village. And, before we send that child, that young black boy into the school, into that classroom, again, we have to prepare them, in terms of their emotional self. Despite what society might think about you, despite even what your teacher or educational leaders might think about you, this is who you are. You are a prince. You are a future king. You have brilliance. So it's that affirmation. I think that comes from the parents, that comes from the community. Second, we need to hold teachers and educational leaders accountable. That's one of the things that, oftentimes that we overlook. No, we need to hold them accountable. If an educator has a history of making comments, to students, no, that's unacceptable. If generation after generation, this school, we're seeing the results, you know what? We need to hold them accountable. It starts with policy. So if that means that, our politicians, if that means we have to go to Harrisburg, so be it. But then, often we have to get them into schools. Oftentimes we just send them to schools. They don't even know what's going on. Right. So again, presence matters. And not to say, and I don't want to say that this is not occurring, because then I might get pushback and, parents are saying that, we are doing this. What I'm saying is that, we need masses of parents to, do these types of practices.
But there's something that seems to occur on a more insidious level. So you're talking about policy, you're talking about identifying, teachers who are not in alignment with your ultimate goals. It's not always the teacher who's making a conscious decision to say, oh, I'm not going to give him this test, or I'm not going to expect him to, you know what I'm saying? Like that's something that's much more deeply rooted. What do you see as a viable solution if we're talking about something that permeates the entire system itself?
Yeah, definitely. Teacher education prep programs, this is where it starts. Where we need to have these conversations of race, racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. That needs to be ingrained. We need to talk about our own personal biases. You need to explore that. That's in teacher prep programs. So when we talk about veteran teachers and educational leaders, we need to have some hardcore professional development sessions. We need to bring in some resources, that can kind of help us to really examine the practices that we are, employing, with black boys, but I would argue all students.
We're here with Dr. Ron Whitaker, and when we come back, we're going to dig a little bit deeper.
I think we all need a pep talk. The world needs to stop being boring. Yeah, you. Boring is easy. Everybody can be boring, but you're gooder than that. Life is not a game, people. Life isn't a cereal either. Well, it is a cereal. And if life is a game, aren't we on the same team? I mean, really, right? I'm on your team, be on my team. This is life, people. You got air coming through your nose. You got heartbeat. That means it's time to do something. A poem. Two roads diverged in the woods, and I took the road less traveled. It hurt, man! Really bad. Rocks, thorns, and glass. My parts broke. Wah! Not cool, Robert Frost. But what if there really were two paths? I want to be the one that leads to awesome. It's like that dude Journey said, don't stop believing unless your dream's stupid. Then you should get a better dream. I think that's how it goes. Get a better dream and keep going. Keep going, keep going, and keep going.
We're back with 28 Days and Dr. Ronald Whitaker, and we're going to dig a little deeper. Mark, with a break, you had an interesting perspective and question.
So you left off talking about some of these different teacher training programs and how they can prepare teachers. But from my experience working at some of these schools with some of the teachers who have come through this program, America is one of the only places in the world that I know of where people become teachers because they don't know what they want to do with their lives. So there's young kids who are finding themselves and finding their path.
Right.
What is to say that they are going to, in maybe their 2-year period, they're going to commit themselves to the students, commit themselves to the community, but more importantly, commit themselves to do that internal work that you were talking about to overcome their bias?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to reshape teacher prep programs. Right. So for example, in my classes, I'm going to integrate culturally responsive pedagogy, into classroom discourse. So we're going to talk about issues of race, racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. We're going to have that conversation. We're going to talk about social justice and not just talking about it from, symbol as symbolism, but you know, we're going to really go deep, you know, into issues of social justice and what that means for all students. Right. One program, for example, Illinois State University, they were profiled this past fall on PBS, and what they have their students do is for a month they are living in the communities, various communities in Chicago. You know, so it's an opportunity for them to learn from the families, to understand the community strengths. And you know what individuals are saying about that experience, number one is that teachers are understanding they're not here to save individuals. They are here to serve. When you go into the communities, you get an opportunity to learn from the experts. You get an opportunity to see some of the great programs that are happening. But then, as one lady said that was hosting one of the students, is that this student also gets an opportunity to see that everything that they might have heard or seen on the TV is not true. Okay? So vis-a-vis, when you turn on the news, you hear about everything bad that's happening in Chicago, and particularly the south side of Chicago. But when a student actually lives with a family in the south side of Chicago, get a chance to understand that, you know what, it's a lot of great things happening. The families, you know, are very supportive of their students. You know, it's just a transformational opportunity. Certainly. Yeah.
One of the things that came to mind as you was talking, if teachers are afraid of their students, based on the stereotype, how does that impact the students' failure or success?
I mean, well, first of all, we're talking about it. You know, if you're afraid of a student, how you define something, or in this context, how you define black boys, normally correlates with how you engage them. So if I'm defining you as a problem, I'm going to engage you from a problem perspective. Okay? So again, it's that opportunities for teachers to form authentic relationships. Okay? So that can be, you know, that can happen, you know, when a teacher spends time in the community. That can happen when the teacher forms these relationships with the family. That can happen when a teacher sees the whole child and not just these test scores. 49% of the African-American male students in this school, they're failing, but you get an opportunity to really know Dante, or you get an opportunity to know Reginald. So we have to form these authentic relationships.
So, you know, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, which I think is a powerful aspect, you said that, you know, we need to hold folks accountable, particularly through, I guess, community engagement, right? But one of the obstacles we're often told is, you know, parents are, you know, maybe working, they don't have the time to be able to show up at their children's schools. What are some ways that we can sort of build an accountability structure that really centralizes the community?
Wow, you know, even before getting to strategies, one of the things that I'm still wrestling with is if we're not seeing this as a crisis. From an academic standpoint, I know theories. I know what the scholarship is saying. I know what the quantitative numbers are saying. Not only that, I'm in the schools. This is not someone that is in their ivory tower. I'm actually in schools at least twice a week. If we don't understand that we have a crisis that is occurring, the strategies that I lay out, it's just that. But, you know, as we talk about being strategic, I think it starts with the families. I think it starts with the community group, vis-a-vis the church, or, you know, another organization in the community, forming these relationships with the school, you know, meeting with the teachers, meeting with the educational leaders. Again, if a teacher historically, you know, has a reputation for making derogatory comments to students, you know what? Again, as that community group, we have some work to do.
Wow, they got to go. So how can we empower parents? Because at times I think when people in distressed areas and a lot of pressure on them, maybe from a single parent perspective, and they don't feel empowered, what are some of the techniques or tools that you can parlay to those parents to get involved and hold those teachers accountable, as you said?
Yeah, well, I mean, parents, they play an influential role. And again, I don't want to stereotype all parents in terms of, and I know that you're not doing that in terms of saying that they're not empowered. But I think a real conversation needs to be had with parents, with other guardians, with the leaders, in terms of, you are a person of influence. If this school is not working for you, you can do something about it. Your presence matters. So I think when we shift that conversation in terms of you have influence, then I think parents and community leaders, they can begin to understand that, you know what, we can make a change.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that folks are not even seeing this as a crisis. Who is not seeing this as a crisis, and why do you think it's not being identified as such?
Well, you know, let's just deal with it. This is not a new phenomenon in 2017.
Right.
I mean, if we want to be honest, we've been talking about the academic achievement gap for decades. So we have to really get to the point. Are we going to deal with root issues, or are we just going to do symbolic things? You know, so essentially what I'm talking about is a real and courageous conversation about race and racism, and how come certain groups of students and how come certain communities historically are having these outcomes. You know, and if we don't want to really deal with that, then essentially what we're saying is that we just believe that they're inferior.
And that's all it boils down to. And that's it. Yeah.
This is what they deserve.
Of course. Yep. Yeah. We're here with Dr. Ronald Whitaker on the set of 28 Days and Beyond, and when we come back, we'll have our final thoughts.
To train our people, and they bring them to like the southern parts of the U.S.
That's what I'm talking about.
It was nice meeting you. Nice meeting you too. Thank you.
I've really made a connection with him, and I plan on being his mentor, and I plan on working with him from now on.
Today is tryouts, and on Wednesday I find out if I make the team. I've been playing basketball since my freshman year, and I really want to hoop. So with AMA, they just gave me the courage to do it and to try it. For me, hoop is for my mom. So you know, I'll go hoop and she'll come watch me.
You can't really do nothing by yourself. You know, you need people around you, you need supporters.
Here's your focus right now. The schools that you want to go to, and then financial aid, scholarships, stuff like that. Let's take it back 2 years ago. Did you see yourself here in this position to where all these schools are pulling you and saying, hey, come on?
I didn't really think I was gonna go to college, actually. I'm gonna be the first one, so I'm gonna be the first generation, so I thought I was just gonna ride along with the fam, not going to college. I feel like I'm making the right decision.
We're back with 28 Days and Beyond with Dr. Whitaker with our final thoughts.
So, you know, you said something that you said this is obviously an issue that's been going back decades, right? And I think about Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who said that the worst thing that happened to black people was integration. Because what we had under integration, although the sort of resources weren't there in terms of monetary resources, we did have a community of people who knew who the teachers were, and the teachers knew who the students were invested in the well-being of those students, because those students also represented their own well-being, right? It's a completely different structure from what we have today. You know, my father went to segregated schools, and he had stories about, you know, who Mr. So-and-so calling his father and telling him X, Y. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Which it's, and by extension, you know, statistically we know the schools are more segregated now than they were, but we don't have any control over the education of our own, over our own children. So how do we move forward?
Wow, I wish we had more time for that, brother. But again, it goes back to, and I love how you give the history, it goes back to, we have to love ourselves, we have to control the narrative, and we have to say, in spite of what society thinks about you, you have value. You are a prince, you're not a problem. Young black boy get killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and he's viewed as this hawk and not a black boy, not a young black male with tons of potential. You know, oftentimes with athletes, they do great things on the court or the the football field, and we say that this person is a beast. Language matters. Even for myself as a professor, oftentimes they want to compliment style and swagger instead of the scholar. All that to say is that despite what society, the labels that they want to put on you, it is important that the families, that the organizations, that we affirm ourselves. And you are correct. Essentially, once we start to do that, and once we start to understand that the impact that the school system has been having on black boys, we can begin to challenge that structure. We can begin to say, hey, have you considered this piece of literature? Of course, years ago, this is how this school was flourishing. Have you thought about redesigning the curriculum? Absolutely.
Definitely. Dr. Ronald Whitaker, we want to thank you for joining us here on 28 Days and Beyond, where we celebrate and reflect on our history, our heritage, and our culture. Until next time, peace.